Federal government identifies 54 private parks for truck holding bays to ease Apapa gridlock. National Agency for Food and Drug Administration's End Control, NAFDAC, considers modifying Sniper's containers. In international news, all is quiet in Hong Kong as Legislative Council postpones debate on extradition legislation. And in sport, Enyimba FC crowned NPFL champions.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatuji. One of the Nigerian Air Force combat helicopters deployed on anti-banditry operations in the northwest crash-landed at the Katsina airport on Wednesday. The Air Force says there were no casualties, and this incident occurred barely 5 months after another Mi-35M helicopter crashed in Damasak, Borno State. It was providing close air support to troops on counterinsurgency operations. All 5 crew members were killed in that incident. NAF Director of Public Relations and Information, Air Commodore Ibikunle Daramola, says Chief of Air Staff, Air Marshal Sadiq Abubakar, has since ordered the constitution of a board of inquiry to ascertain the cause of the crash. There are indications National Assembly leaders may announce 3 committees today. The lawmakers in both chambers are expected to return to their respective homes right after the plenary sessions because their offices are not ready. Leadership of the All Progressives Congress and People's Democratic Party will send the names of their candidates to the presiding officers for announcement as principal officers any moment from now. Senate President and Speaker of the House of Representatives are expected to constitute the Rules and Business Committees, Interim Media Committees, and House Senate Services Committees. The lawmakers will also meet the House and Senate Service Committees to ensure all items needed are provided in the offices. The federal government is facing head-on the issue of Apapa gridlock that has basically held the port, drivers and residents of the area hostage for quite a long time. In finding a solution to the perennial problem, the government has identified 54 private parks that can be used as truck holding bays to ease or eliminate the gridlock. Already, Nigerian Ports Authority has converted its Lily Pond container terminal to a trucks holding bay. The authorities has also introduced a manual call-up system to reduce the problem on port roads, while some terminal operators at the nation's seaports have started using their own call-up system. NPA would commence the implementation of electronic call-up system in August. Executive Secretary of Nigerian Shippers Council, Hassan Bello, explains that the newly identified truck parks would eliminate gridlock. Authorities say 60% of the gridlock was caused by lack of traffic management and indiscipline. Bello says once the truck parks become functional, Apapa gridlock will end. Director General of the National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, NAFDAC, Professor Christiana Adeyeye, says the agency, along with other relevant bodies, is considering modifying the agrochemical container as part of plans to discourage its in-season use as a suicide tool in the country. She said Sniper containers could now be made very difficult to open or may be turned into a spray rather than the liquid content by which it is known. The DG says use of Sniper and other agrochemicals for preservation of food should be discouraged as they contain substances harmful to the human body. World Health Organization has said in a report that an estimated 600 million cases of foodborne diseases occur annually. It says children under 5 years old carry 40% of the burden of the diseases. 125,000 deaths are recorded annually. Adeyeye said there had been recurring food safety issues as well as emerging issues in Nigeria, including artificial ripening of fruits using unapproved agents such as calcium carbide. She said consumption of such fruits could have deleterious effects on health. Owendo PLC minority shareholders are alleging that the Security and Exchange Commission, the apex regulatory body of the Nigerian capital market, was not fair in its dealings with the oil company because of the way in which it cancelled the company's annual general meeting. They said they were given barely 24 hours notice. Speaking on behalf of the group, Secretary General of the Association of Investors Liberalization, Hamzat Ridwan, says while shareholders fully support the regulator for its role in regulating and protecting the capital market, SEC had not acted in shareholders' best interest in the case of Owendo. He says neither had the SEC protected their investment. Civil society and conservation groups have called on the federal government to find lasting solutions to air pollution in Nigeria, especially the Niger Delta. They say the pollution caused mostly by the extractive industry in the region has led to various environmental challenges and health problems. According to recent World Health Organization data, Nigeria has 4 of the most air-polluted cities in the world. Onitsha is labeled the world's most polluted city in air quality. Kaduna came 5th, Aba 6th, and Umuahia 16th. Recently published Global Environmental Outlook confirms that both outdoor and indoor air quality are deteriorating rapidly in many areas as a result of various factors such as the use of firewood and other biomass as sources of energy, increasing traffic volumes, importation of old vehicles, and increased use of the 2-stroke engine motorcycles as alternative means of transport in both urban and rural areas. Coming up, African stories. Young boy dies of Ebola in Uganda. 2 relatives have the disease. And later, international news. Hong Kong protests shut down government. Debate of extradition bill postponed.
You are watching ANN.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to stories making news across the continent. A child in Uganda has died of Ebola in the first cross-border case of the virus since an outbreak began in neighboring Congo a year ago. The World Health Organization and Uganda's Ministry of Health have confirmed 2 more cases in Uganda after the virus claimed the life of the 5-year-old boy. The Health Ministry says the 2 patients are the boy's relatives. The 2 patients whose blood samples tested positive for Ebola are relatives of the boy. The confirmation now brings the number of those WHO have been infected with the hemorrhagic fever to 3, fewer than 24 hours after the government announced the child as the first case in the country. Health Minister Dr. Jane Ruth says Uganda has been in preparedness mode ever since the Ebola outbreak was declared in DRC. She says the country now moves into response mode. WHO says the virus has killed nearly 1,400 people in the region since August of last year. Uganda hosts Africa's largest refugee population, 1.25 million people, with 2/3 having fled from South Sudan. Last year's peace deal raised hopes for some South Sudanese that they could soon return home. But the fragile peace has discouraged many from leaving Uganda's refugee camps despite struggles for adequate aid. Villa Halita Otumatho reports from Adjumani, Uganda.
James Gwemawer joins other South Sudanese elders for a board game at the Maji refugee settlement in Uganda. It's been 6 years since he arrived here after losing his cattle during fighting in South Sudan. His family is scattered to different refugee settlements in Uganda, and he's still wondering when they can all go home.
I need to first witness peaceful resettlement of my people back home, with no war or tribal conflict before I can return. But now, I can't think of going back. Things are still bad. I can't leave.
63-year-old Madalena Moraya hopes to return to South Sudan one way or another.
My husband died and was buried in South Sudan. My other children are buried there. When I die, I want to be buried beside them.
There are over 800,000 South Sudanese refugees in settlements just inside Uganda, more than 4 times the number in 2016. Uganda's State Minister for Refugees says their ability to help is being challenged.
We had never known that at any given time we'll host over 1 million people. We had always oscillated between 200,000, 300. That was what we knew, even at the peak of displacement from DR Congo, from Rwanda, and from Burundi. But when South Sudan collapsed, then we received refugees surpassing 1 million, and that overwhelmed our systems.
In May, Uganda and the United Nations Refugee Agency appealed for $927 million in funding to address refugee needs until 2020. The appeal is complicated by the alleged misuse of aid and exaggeration of refugee numbers that saw 4 Ugandan officials dismissed and investigations launched. The United Nations Refugee Agency says donors also no longer see the situation as an emergency.
We're falling short of what is really required in terms of access to basic services, such as education. Water is slightly better covered, health slightly better covered, but education, needs for environment, energy, protection, where we're falling short of really what the refugees deserve and need.
For the time being, South Sudanese refugees in Uganda will get by on basic services and wait for the day when it is safe to return home. Halima Othmani for VOA News, Adjumani, Uganda.
Still in Uganda, the role of the 22,000 AMISOM troops and police in Somalia may phase out if the AU goes ahead with its plan to withdraw the forces and hand over the security of the region to Somalian military. Uganda is warning that such a plan should be responsibly executed. AMISOM soldiers and police are from 6 African countries. They are deployed to protect the Somalian government and to fight the militant.
The Ugandan army warns the gains made by the African Union mission in Somalia, known as AMISOM, may be lost if the plan to gradually pull out troops and hand over security to Somali forces is not handled carefully.
In this case, I think the timing was not very perfect, considering that some of the key enablers and force multipliers are really not in place. For example, there is an absolute shortage of helicopters, both utility and combat, that could, in such a case, take on missions that these troops that have been reduced over time would have done.
Uganda has over 6,000 troops in Somalia, more than any other country. The country says it will be necessary to empower the Somali army to deal with the militant group Al-Shabaab. Some security experts agree with Uganda's views, saying this decision of removal must not be rushed.
They are dealing with the war of ideology, which they allowed. In fact, the UN and other forces allowed this war to blossom for about 30 years. So it cannot be swept out in 1 minute. So it's a situation of being patient. If they don't want to lose the gains, they have got so far. We have got so far.
The UN Security Council renewed its authorization of AMISOM by 1 year, but decided to cut 1,000 troops from the 20,000 regional peacekeeping force. AMISOM has managed to gain control of the major towns in Somalia, but Al-Shabaab militants still occupy vast rural areas. Uganda was the first to deploy troops in Somalia in 2007. Other countries, including Kenya, Djibouti, Burundi and Ethiopia, are also now participating.
When we return, international news. All is quiet in Hong Kong as Legislative Council postpones debate on extradition legislation. And later, sports. Aimba FC are NPFL champions.
You are watching ANN. Shining our eyes on breaking news, whether in the east or in the west, with Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Boko Haram in Nigeria, with turbulence in the north and agitation in the south. Wherever you live in Nigeria, wherever news happens in Africa, we've got it covered. ANN News, connecting Africans in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to world event. All seems quiet today in Hong Kong after violent clashes between police and protesters on Thursday. The demonstration was in opposition to a controversial bill that calls for the extradition of criminal suspects for trial in mainland China. Demonstrators had planned to continue their Wednesday march, but heavy rain on Thursday scattered fresh protests. Thousands of activists had marched through the streets on Wednesday, shutting down government headquarters and the Legislative Council on a day the extradition bill was to have been debated. The Legislative Council said Thursday no time has been set aside to debate the legislation. Officers wearing helmets and carrying shields lined up on streets, firing tear gas, rubber bullets and using pepper spray to push back protesters, some of whom overturned barricades and threw objects at police. Hospital authorities say at least 72 persons were injured. What troubles Hong Kong residents, international business groups and pro-democracy parties is that extradition to mainland China would expose Hong Kong residents to a substantially different legal system that would conflict with their democratic heritage. Yemeni Houthi forces are being blamed for a missile attack on a civilian airport in southern Saudi Arabia on Wednesday. 26 persons were wounded. The Western-backed Sunni Muslim alliance that has been battling the Iran-aligned Houthi movement in Yemen said the early morning strike was a proof of Iranian support for what it called cross-border terrorism. The coalition said in a statement a projectile hit the arrivals hall at Habha Airport, causing material damage. 3 women and 2 children of Saudi, Yemeni and Indian nationalities were among the wounded. The Houthis said on their media channels that they fired a cruise missile at Habha Airport, about 100 kilometers north of the Yemen border. The airport serves domestic and regional routes. Saudi-owned Al Arabiya TV quoted the coalition as saying the evidence indicates Iran's Revolutionary Guards supplied the Houthis with a weapon that targeted the airport, but Iran has not responded to the charge. Saudi Deputy Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman said on Twitter late on Wednesday the Houthis will be confronted with unwavering resolve. A day after the U.S. House passed a resolution authorizing its committees to take the Trump administration to court and pursue criminal contempt cases to enforce their subpoenas, the House Oversight Committee voted on Wednesday in favor of holding Attorney General William Barr and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in contempt of Congress. This is because of the Trump administration's refusal to comply with the committee's subpoena for information about why a U.S. citizenship question was added to the 2020 census. The citizenship question could be problematic for at least 11 million undocumented immigrants in the country who fear immigration agents could use the information to detain and deport them to their homelands. Demographers and Trump Democratic critics fear that non-U.S. citizens will skip the census if the question is included, leaving the government with an inaccurate count. Trump claimed executive privilege Wednesday in refusing to hand over documents to Democratic lawmakers investigating the census question. But House panel's chairman, Rep. Elijah Cummings of Maryland, questioned what the president may be hiding by his administration's blanket defiance of Congress' constitutionally mandated responsibilities. Tens of thousands of Moscow residents have taken up car sharing to combat soaring parking costs and a dwindling number of spaces. A trend that has made the Russian capital one of the world's fastest growing markets for such schemes. Authorities in the city of 12.5 million have cut the number of parking spaces to encourage residents to walk while increasing parking fees to raise revenue and ease traffic in one of the world's most congested cities. Lisa Taylor reports.
In 2019, it's the most congested city in the world. Moscow has already hiked parking fees and cut spaces to tempt people out of their cars. But that may also have had an unexpected effect.
Let's book a car. There is one car available right near me.
Tens of thousands of people a day are using car sharing instead.
Now I booked a car and they gave me like 5 minutes to go there and to take it.
Leo drives a shared car almost every day. It costs a few dollars an hour, and when he arrives, he leaves it for the next driver, meaning no parking costs. He says it's actually more convenient than having his own car.
Actually, I can buy a car, but I don't see a point because most of trips I do is car sharing, and sometimes I use taxi, and sometimes I go one way by car sharing and other way by subway. Car sharing gives a lot of freedom.
There are downsides. He says it can be difficult to find a car at peak times, but the number of shared vehicles here is growing. Moscow's authorities say there are now 17,000 shared cars in the city. And because lots of people use the same ones, each shared vehicle replaces 7 private cars on the streets. By next year, they say there will be more shared cars here than anywhere else.
Generally, the Russian car-sharing market is world-leading. In Moscow alone, the car-sharing market grows multifold 2 or 3 times annually. This makes Moscow a unique city in the world.
There are still vastly more private cars than shared ones in Moscow, but developers believe there's a growing market of drivers who will help them to overtake.
Up next, sports. Enyimba FC crowned NPFL champions. Please stay with us.
You are watching ANN.
Welcome back. This is ANN News in Sport. Enyimba FC are the 2019 Nigeria Professional Football League champions for a record 8th time after a 3-0 win over Akwa United in Lagos on Wednesday. Goals from Reuben Bala, Stanley Dingba and Abdurrahman Bashir secured an emphatic win for his men at Dallas side. Enyimba finished the 2019 championship playoffs with remarkable 12 points in 5 games with 4 wins and 10 goals. Nigeria's league management company has come down hard on Kano Pillars and their captain, Rabiu Ali, following crowd disturbances and harassment of match referees during the match against Enugu Rangers on Monday. LMC announced an 8 million naira fine on Kano Pillars, while its captain, Rabiu Ali, was slammed with a 12-match ban. He is also to refrain from all NPFL activities during that period. The league management company has charged Kano Pillars with a 4-count breach of NPFL's framework and rules. Rabiu Ali was charged for accosting the referee and inciting others to commit acts of violence and misconduct in breach of NPFL rules. That is ANN News this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on these and other stories, visit our social media platforms and join the conversation on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Have a pleasant evening.